A little bit different, and that was intentional today. I was sharing with the gentleman here that I was in my hotel room last night. I'm ironing a suit, as I generally do, and I said to myself, these good people at Cain and Bultman don't want to see that tomorrow. Fortunately, I had a pair of jeans in my suitcase, or it could have went really bad. So, but anyway, thank you guys for coming out. I know it's more about the barbecue than it is for me, but it does make me feel good to see a room full of people. So, Alan, I guess thank you. So I'm the retirement guy. I'm the 401k guy. So guess what we're going to be talking about today? Anybody? I heard retirement over here, but no. Actually, we're not going to talk about retirement. Maybe just briefly I'm going to touch on it as we go through our presentation here today. As you know, that's what we normally gather here to discuss. But I get to travel around a lot and work with a lot of companies, and I get to sit down and talk with a lot of participants. And I can tell you that one of the main things that we're hearing from participants today is they really just want more access to better, more comprehensive financial wellness resources. So financial wellness is something that goes well beyond just your 401k plan. It's how we manage our monthly household budgets. It's how we, look at our credit reports and things of that nature. So today we're not going to be talking about retirement a whole lot, but we're going to be talking about those other important things that can help to get financial lives on track. I usually have a screen behind me with a nice little PowerPoint. I'm going to forego that today. Most of the slides in my booklet, and yours doesn't match mine, so don't worry about opening it up, is just simple imagery. So, for example, I'm going to spare you the 12-foot slide behind me that shows a roll of toilet paper on the slide, but it's it's an interesting story nonetheless. Today's presentation is what we call 60 Minutes to Change. And we developed this content in partnership with a gentleman by the name of Peter Dunn. He's also known as Pete the Planner nationally. He has a syndicated column in USA Today, appearing once a week. He's a nationally syndicated radio talk show host. He regularly appears on CNBC, CNN, MSNBC, all those cable channels, where they need experts to come in and talk about, consumer financial issues. So we're very proud of the content that we work to put together with Pete. If you are on the participant website at One America, a lot of these materials that we've developed with Pete are integrated right into the website. You'll find them on the Education tab on the left-hand side of the site. And then you'll run into Pete the Planner throughout that financial wellness platform. It's called One Day is Today, by the way, because we know that a lot of people say, yeah, one day I'll think about, taking a look at my finances, or one day I'll think about getting in the plan or making a change. But one day never comes because we're busy, and we have busy personal lives, we have busy financial lives. So we're here to remind you that one day you will, and one day is today, and that's where our content comes from. So 60 Minutes to Change. This is actually kind of a groundbreaking concept for a lot of people, because one of the first things that we talk about in this program is how money has absolutely nothing to do with money. It sounds crazy, right? But it's true. Money actually has nothing to do with money. You all know the math and the numbers and all that stuff, but I'm not going to ask you to be good at math or numbers today, but I will ask you to accept one very simple truth, and that is that money has more to do with behavior than it does with money. We can all add, subtract, multiply, and divide. But if you have been in a situation where you have had financial pressures or financial stress in your life, it may not be because of the math or the numbers, but it could be more attributed to behavior. Right? So if this is a new concept for you, it's not designed to say, bad behavior, bad result. That's not what it's about. But it's just about making that connection that our financial lives are actually connected to our behavior. So, with that premise, I want to just kind of start out talking about how we make that connection to our behavior. We all know that we're required to spend less than we make, right? That's easy. You know, we all get that. But what we want to realize is that the output of our financial lives is going to only be as good as the input. So we're going to talk today about looking at our behaviors and determining whether or not they actually line up well with our financial priorities. So actually think about this for just a moment. Think about the number one financial priority that you have in your life right now. It could be buying a house, it could be paying off the house, it could be spending down credit cards, it could be any number of things, saving for your child's college education. It could be any one of those things. But what we want to look at today is, do my behaviors, my financial behaviors, line up with my number one financial priority? We put a lot of research into this content today, and what we found was that only about 3% of our disposable monthly income goes towards our number one financial priority. So that already sounds like it's, there's not a connection there. So if it's your number one financial priority, your monthly behavior should reflect that. So if my number one behavior is to pay down credit card debt, but I'm spending more on dining out or on shopping purchases maybe than I am on paying down my credit card debt, I can say it's my number one priority, but my behavior doesn't necessarily indicate that. So think of it in those terms. And if you're only going to devote 3% of your monthly income, you're probably going to end up with a feeling of frustration. 3% is probably not going to help you meet that number one financial priority. So just keep that in mind. Sorry guys, I'm mute here. Somebody in New York though, so get rid of them. One thing you might need to know about Peter Dunn is that he was actually raised in a Midwestern plumbing operation. His family were all plumbers. They worked in the plumbing business. So I think that's how Pete settled on this image on the slide here, the roll of toilet paper. He says it's a resource that is very fond to him. I suspect it may be fond to all of you as well. But he uses it in a very creative way. So he wants us to understand how resources impact our decision-making process or our behavior. When we have a lot of resources, say for example, you walk into the restroom and you see a full roll on the wall. Pete says, at that point you can go crazy. You could go 5-ply if you wanted to. You could make little basketballs and shoot them up over the door and try to get them in the wastebasket. You could do all kinds of crazy things because you have a lot of resources. But what if we don't have a lot of resources? What if you get in there and you look over and you're seeing some cardboard and some tattered paper and stuff like that? Our behavior changes instantly. Boy, do we get resourceful then. We're not going 5-ply. We're certainly not throwing it over the door. We're going to use this very, very wisely, right? So the amount of resources that we have at our disposal impacts our behavior. Let's say for just argument's sake, it's payday, and we determine after work we want to go out to dinner with our significant other. Right? So we call her or him and we say, hey, meet me at our favorite restaurant for dinner. We walk in and we sit down and we're going over the menu and we're feeling good. It's Friday, it's payday. And say, you know what? Let's start with a little appetizer tonight. What do you say? That really shishi one. Let's get that one, right? And then the entrees come. You order big meals, and then after dinner it's time for dessert, and you do the ice cream sundae with all the toppings on it and everything. This is a great meal, right? And those are the decisions that we allow ourselves to make when it's payday. But think about if you went out to dinner, same person, same restaurant. The only difference is it's the day before payday, right? You know, you walk in, you sit down, and you're already thinking to yourself, yeah, no appetizer tonight, water for me, and dessert, yep, I saw that tray of mints on the counter when we came in, so I'm going to get one of those on the way out. You know, we just think differently when we have more resources at our disposal. And you think, yeah, well, that's a cute story, but how does that apply to me? Well, think about this for a second. You know, if you are in the enviable position that, you know, at the end of the week, you know, you have the ability to, you know, pay all your bills, and at the end of the week you have, you know, a balance in your checking account. Well, what do you think you're going to do with that balance if you have not identified your number one financial priority? If you don't know where that extra or discretionary spending should be going, what do you think you're going to do with it? Are you going to make good decisions with that money? Or is it going to be sort of like, you know, getting the appetizer and getting the dessert and getting the things that shoot, just a day ago I could have done without that, easy peasy, but because I have all these resources, I'm making different decisions. So if you're in that enviable position, you know, what Pete and others recommend is, you know, try to keep that checking account balance as low as possible, right? By either, you know, transferring it into a savings account, or, you know, actually let me put this in a proper context. You know, we all have a lot of competing financial priorities. One of those is certainly to set up a short-term emergency reserve fund, you know, in case the car breaks down, or, you know, we live in Florida, so we have natural disasters, you name it, right? Things, that unforeseen emergencies. We want to have that. It should be equal to about 3 months of your net income, for you and your spouse if you're married. 3 months of your net income should go into an emergency reserve fund. So it's okay living paycheck to paycheck if you know that you're taking care of these competing financial priorities at the same time. So, you know, when I say that, living paycheck to paycheck, I mean, that's a term that we're all familiar with. But remember, you can actually put yourself in that situation, and it can be a positive thing, right? Because yes, I'm living paycheck to paycheck, but you know what? I've got, you know, 5% going into my 401k plan that's getting matched. I'm getting, you know, contributions that go towards my future. I've got, you know, 4% that I set aside going into my rainy day fund right now. You know, once I build that up, I'm going to take that 4% and I'm going to do something else with it. You know, but you can live paycheck to paycheck and have a really rewarding financial life. It's just kind of, you know, how we you know, describe that term. So resources impact our behavior. This is a great slide, actually. I wish I had this one up on the screen. It's Count Dracula from Sesame Street. You know, he was one of my favorites growing up. And Pete introduces the Count here. To really drive that point of behavior home. Because here's the thing. As Americans, we have become terrible budgeters. You know, when I was coming up back in the 80s, you know, one of the first things I learned in my financial life was how to balance my checkbook. Right? It was a process every month. The back of your checking account statement had all the spaces for you to make all your notes, and you'd go through and you'd figure out, you know, what checks cleared, what was outstanding, which checks did I forget to write down, all those things, right? You know, this is what we would do each and every month. In that process, it helped us to understand, like, okay, where's the money going? Oh yeah, I spent, you know, $3.50 over here, $12 here. You know, $9 there. It was that process where we would like literally touch each and every transaction that we were party to once a month. We don't do that anymore. You know, we're basically on a big cruise ship. You know, we are. We just walk around, we swipe our card. You know, like that. The cruise companies figured that out. They're like, oh yeah, if they can't tell how much money they're spending, then we know they're just going to spend it. So here's a card for you, right? And this will work anywhere on the ship.
Oh, wow.
And they figured that out a long time ago. It worked really well for the cruise companies, but don't let it work against you, because you own this boat, right? So, you know, we walk around all the time and we swipe that card so frequently. And we actually put a lot of research into this project here. And Pete was doing some study back in 2008. He wanted to do a study on budgeting. who in 2008 wanted to be part of a study on budgeting, right? Remember the financial crisis, right? Nobody wanted to talk about money. I mean, this was a bad time to be doing this study. Pete's a smart guy, though, and he said, no, I'm determined. We're going to get some good data out of this. It's not going to be, you know, how much do you spend on, you know, rent, utilities, gas, electric, yada, yada, yada. He said, just tell me the frequency with which you spend money. I want to know how often you spend money. And what they found was that the average American household spent money 22 times per week. That was just the average. Not saying it's good or bad. And this is not, you know, paying the rent or paying the electric or, you know, utilities, car payment. This is like stopping by the dry cleaners or the CVS or running into Target, Walgreens, and, you know, all those little incidental stops. And, you know, they found that not only were people spending money 22 times per week, but here's the really interesting detail. They learned that the more times they swiped that card in a given week, the less they cared about the total amount that they were spending. Right? So that's easy to see, right? If you're only swiping it a couple times, you know exactly what it was you bought, and you know the priority and the reasons for which you did it. But when you get out to 18, 19, 22, maybe it's 25, 27, you lose track of that. We lose sight of what did we buy and how much have we spent? Oh gosh, I don't even care, I need that. I'm just going to swipe my card again. So the frequency with which we spend money, it has everything to do with our behavior. So Pete reminds us to count our transactions. Count the number of times. Do this for a week. Count the number of a couple weeks, right? Count the number of times that you're swiping your card on a daily basis. Figure out what that number is. Pete, by the way, in his research determined that an appropriate amount is between 12 and 15 times per week. So if you count yours and you're in the 32 range, you know, there's some really good feedback there, right? But if you count yours and you know, you're at or in or below the minimum, fantastic. But understand what those purchases are, how your behavior is being impacted, certainly when you have, you know, more resources at your disposal. So Pete took it one step further, and he said, hey, you know, if I'm really going to go out there and sing the praises of this program, I should put my money where my mouth is. And he and his wife committed for a month to limit themselves to 5 transactions per week for both of them, right? That's filling up the car, that's going to the grocery store. He said, so we really had to think about this. You know, we got up on a Sunday morning, we went to the grocery store, we got all of our groceries for the week, one swipe, you know, fill up the cars, you know, one swipe. You know, and then he's like, during the week, you know, it was challenging, but we got through it. You know, I had to go out to lunch, or my wife had to do this, or, you know, pick up something, some prescription medication or whatever. I said, but we did it, and we did it for 4 consecutive weeks, to the point that when we were done, and we had a little latitude on how frequently we could spend, we found that we didn't spend that much. We weren't at the 22 times per week. In fact, you know, we felt ourselves kind of hitting a threshold when we got up around 10 or 12, right? So they purposefully put that restriction on themselves just to see what it would feel like, and I think they were very, very pleased with the results, especially when they could, you know, return back to normal. So try that, everyone. Try to, you know, count your transactions. You know, if you're married, this is a great game, right? It's a great fun game. I'm gonna try to spend less than you this week, or less frequently, the number of swipes. I want my count to be less than yours, right? So that's great. And the reason I say that is because it's about accountability. You know, if you have accountability to each other, and that's, you know, it's easy if you're married, but, you know, if you're not married, you know, find a friend and say, hey, I heard about this thing. You want to try it? Because, you know, I want to get my financial life on track, you know, and this is one way that, you know, we can kind of figure out how to do that, right?
Is that 22 swipes per family or individual?
22 swipes per household. That's a great question. So, you know, if you're, you know, single, or you have a big family, you know, you can kind of modify that. But, you know, the idea is understanding what your baseline is. So just kind of track your spending for a couple of weeks, figure out what's right for you. And then, you know, if it's at or above or in the range, whatever, say, well, hey, I'm in the range, but you know what? I'm going to try to reduce it by 25%. You know, just try to swipe 25% less.
And by the way, Bob, if you get to your limit of swipes, that doesn't mean you just can't take cash out.
I was gonna ask if you get cash back.
He's looking at the total expenditures.
Oh, we thought you could get cash back on one.
If you spend it up, you'll have some cash back.
So you
for
get
another
cash
day.
back at Publix, and then you're set.
That's what I'm saying.
She's brilliant. I saw a question over here.
How many of your employees just been setting up Quicken? You know, the trick is to have a budget and be able to keep track. And it's hard to keep track manually. You just kind of don't do it.
Yeah.
And Quicken has a way of using even your credit cards and categorizing them so you can see where it's going.
Yeah.
And without it, you're flying blind. It creates a budget.
This is very true, and so what the gentleman is referring to is computer software that can help you to manage, you know, your financial expenses, etc. Quicken is a great example, and it has a lot of functionality in it. I hear other folks talking about Mint. Is anybody familiar with Mint? This is a free thing that you can get online. It's a free service. It does the same thing. I think it also includes a credit report. My point is there's a lot of different programs out there that you can use, and I think that the heart of your question or observation is, unless you're looking at it, unless you're really going back and reviewing what you're doing, you know, we're just as likely to fall into the same traps that we fell into last month, as opposed to really making progress. So I think that's a great suggestion. Have accountability, and then remember to review your purchases.
And then if you had a recommendation, you could send them an email perhaps with a hot link to the site you mentioned. It can help them get to use it.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
with it, you can create your personal budget and really and it helps tax-wise too.
Absolutely. And he knows for that of which he speaks as a CPA, certified public accountant, and other financial skills as well. So thank you for that. Think about what our typical week is. Like when we wake up on Monday morning, we're on our way into work. Of course, we're going to stop for coffee because it's Monday. Right? Who does that? It's Monday, right? So 10:30 rolls around. Maybe there's a candy bar. We're out to lunch. A snack in the afternoon. On the way home, we didn't go to Target yesterday because it was Sunday, and nobody wants to do that on Sunday. So we go on our way home. Quick stop at CVS. Now we're late, so we grab dinner. It's like 10 transactions right there just on Monday, right? Tuesday, kind of the same thing. Coffee. Out for lunch in the afternoon, so you fill up the car for gas. Wednesday, donuts, coffee, dinner. You see where I'm going with this? By the time Friday rolls around, we've been swiping our card all week long. We're somewhat numb to that effect right now. So Friday, we do all the Friday things, get our shopping done and all that stuff. Out to dinner with the spouse or significant other, and then because it's Friday, we're out to the club. Actually, I threw that in there. Pete will tell you, he's like, I've never been inside of a club, but I put it in here because that way people think I'm cool. So that's Pete's joke. But on Friday, you're out to the club. Saturday is typical errand day. That's probably the most expensive day of the week, frankly, is Saturday, because that's the day that we're running around. We're hitting Home Depot. We're getting all those big projects and all that stuff. A good friend of mine used to call it Big Paper Day. It's the most expensive day of the week is Big Paper Day. When you get all the flyers and circulars in your Saturday paper. So the idea here, guys, is really take inventory of how, when, and where you're spending money, the frequency of it. If that week that I just described, it seems typical for you. There could be some real tangible actions that you can take right in front of you. But if that sounds like a crazy week, well then, hey, that's great. Just try to reduce your count or your spending by approximately 25%. The biggest thing I think that impacts most people in their professional lives, credit and debt. It is the one thing that everybody needs to focus on. You know, when we were children, what kind of expenses did we have? Zero, right? It's as we grow up and we come through this process, we begin to take on responsibilities. We begin to take on obligations. You know, for every one of those responsibilities and spending obligations, we need to make sure that our income surpasses that. That's the basic idea. It would be great if we could go through our entire financial lives and never need to use credit, but we know that's not the case. There are things like automobiles, weddings, college tuition. We find ourselves in need of borrowing money. We just need to make sure, that we do so responsibly, and making sure that our income is sufficient to meet those obligations. So remember, I mean, as we kind of churn through this world, we create these obligations, we create this debt, and these repayment situations that we find ourselves in. So it's really important to make sure that before you get into that situation that you do indeed have the income to make that payment, to make that obligation. Nobody in 2008 and 2009 that was 2 years into a 6-year car lease or a car payment thought for a minute that the economy was going to crash and their financial lives were going to go upside down and they were going to miss a few payments and they were going to destroy their credit and things were going to get bad, right? Nobody thought that. A lot of people found themselves in that situation, in that time period. You don't plan to, see the economy go south, but those are the kinds of things that will come in and impact our financial lives. So just understanding that we have the ability to repay those debts. I want to talk a little bit about student loans. So whether you have student loans yourself or maybe have procreated someone who does, this could be important for you, because what we see in a lot of households, even if the main breadwinner isn't the student debt holder, let's say, use myself. Let's say my son, has $30,000 in student debt, and he comes to dear old dad and he says, "Hey, Dad, really use some help in paying this off," right? Well, where's dear old dad? I mean, I've got maybe 15 years left between here and retirement. Paying off my son's student debt, that's a house I can't live in. So I'm taking the income that I would use in my retirement to pay off, his student debt, right? That becomes a problem for me, unlike if I was using that money to fund my housing or, expenses in retirement, I wouldn't have a problem with that, right? So it creates it's not just a financial transaction, but it creates some pressure and stress in the family, in the household. So if you have 10 to 15 years left between here and retirement, and are considering helping your son or daughter with their financial obligations on student loans or anything like that, talk through that with them and explain to them where you are and why it's important that they pay that off rather than you, because it's just going to really delay you getting on the right path for retirement. So let's talk about the realities of debt. I mean, we know, like, for college tuition, for automobiles, for weddings, those big things, buying a house, we need to take on debt. It's not buying a house that is the problem, right? We all need a place to live. It's when we pick up, those other revolving credit accounts. As I talk with people, I tell people all the time that, I'm in financial services, specifically 401k plans. My biggest competitors are Sea-Doo, Carnival Cruise Lines, I mean, they have some great marketing out there, you know what I mean? Like, I get it. I want to go on those boats too, But see, that's the thing, we can't just assume that debt because, hey, that looks fun, instant gratification. There are realities of debt. The one thing that I will say is, as you monitor, your transactions and everything else, also monitor the number of, cards and lines of credit that you have. I think it's impossible, to not have at least one credit card. You definitely need, for just convenience sake, you want to have one major credit card. I caution everybody against going after the department store credit cards, the Macy's, the Dillard's, all of those places, because, you can go to a lot of stores, you could end up with a lot of open credit accounts, and what does that give us? It's a little tempting, when you walk through the mall and you've got a card for just about every storefront you're going to walk by here, right? So, if I see something, man, I could have it. That's tempting. So, think about that as you think about your behaviors as well. So, having one major credit card, if you're not using those store accounts, get rid of them. I'll say if you're not using accounts generally, get rid of them, but there is a couple of exceptions to that rule. So if I'm about to buy a house or a car, an automobile, I'm about to make a major purchase, don't close your accounts so fast. If you close an account and then you make a hard inquiry, like going after a mortgage or an automobile loan, it could actually count against you. It kind of doesn't make a lot of sense. You're saying, well, hey, I'm doing the right thing, right? I'm not using it, I'm shutting it down. Just don't do it in that instance, right? Get the loan, then shut them down, right? But if you don't have any of those transactions planned in the immediate future and you have open accounts, shut them down. Get rid of that temptation. It will help you to really manage the accounts that go towards your credit report. And we'll be talking about that here in just a moment. But one of the other things that we found, and you may have heard this too, I think probably one of the biggest reasons for bankruptcy in the U.S. today is the result of medical bills. It's the number one reason for bankruptcy and even resulting in foreclosures and things of that nature in this country. But did you also know that medical bills are some of the easiest bills in the world to negotiate? I mean, sometimes just picking up the phone, calling your provider and saying, yes, looking at my bill, it says it's a $1,800 balance. Is there anything that you can do to reduce that balance? Sometimes they'll say right there on the phone, well, if you can pay the entire balance in full today, we'll wipe off 30% of the bill. How does that sound? If you can do that, great, right? But oftentimes they'll say, yeah, well, if you set up a payment plan, $50 a month, then we can do X, Y, or Z. It's very easy to negotiate. And there's a great website out there. It's called healthcarebluebook.com. If you have a procedure coming up or perhaps just went through a procedure, go to healthcarebluebook.com, put in your zip code, put in the procedure. It will compare the cost of that procedure to multiple area medical facilities. It'll tell you what people typically pay for that procedure at each one of those facilities, and it will give you the information that you need to negotiate with your medical provider. So, if I was looking at a report and say, hey, I just paid $4,000 for a set of x-rays that normally cost $2,000, I'm calling my provider and I'm going to share that information with them. Maybe they'll drop me down, So anyway, remember that your medical expenses are actually really, they're quite easy to manage, and you'll find that medical providers are very willing to work with you. The other thing you want to know about medical expenses is they go to collections really quickly. So, make sure that you're interacting with those folks, you're doing what you need to do to try to get those balances knocked down, and then execute on making those payments towards your health. Because otherwise it would go to collection. We talked a little bit about credit reports a moment ago. If you haven't done so, it's so easy to get a copy of your free credit report. There's freecreditreport.com. There's Mint, there's Credit Karma, there's all kinds of free services out there, and they really have some great technology as well to categorize your spending and show you, where all your money is going. But at the very least, retrieve a copy of your credit report And I know that the one thing that people think of when they think of their credit report is the score. They want to know what the number is, right? But I'm going to tell you that that number is not the most important thing on your credit report. So let's talk about what's in there. And if you've seen you've seen your own credit report, you're not going to find any of this too earth-shattering. But as you get that report, you're going to see your total accounts, all the accounts that are registered in your name. It's going to also show you your open accounts, what your current balance is, what the interest rate is, if applicable, your payment history, have you made payments on time. If you miss payments or make late payments, that can make up about 35% of your overall credit card or credit score. So paying your bills on time, obviously, very, very important. You'll also see closed accounts, those accounts that you either successfully paid off or made the affirmative action to close that in the past. It will list any delinquent or derogatory accounts. Derogatory accounts could be like the short sale or foreclosure on a home, things of that nature. And it's important to know what's out there because all of this information is available in the public record. Anybody in the world could go out there and see this information about you. So it's important to know what's in your report. I know sometimes people have come across things that, they said, oh, that's not me, or, I need to write an explanation. You can put notes in there. There's a lot of things you can do to manage your credit profile, but just knowing that this is the same information that's in the public record out there, that's enough reason to take a look at that. Let's talk briefly about the secrets to good credit. Pete tells this story, and the numbers are astronomical, about some person who makes $120,000 a year. They've amassed $90,000 in credit card debt that requires a minimum monthly payment of $4,000.
Wow.
Right, so those are all like really big numbers, right? But just this person, if it wasn't a hypothetical person, so that $120,000 income, it boils down to about $6,000 net pay at the end of the month. Net pay, meaning after taxes and deductions and all that stuff. So $6,000, and I have a $4,000 minimum monthly payment on my credit card debt. If I make those payments, that person would have a credit score of 850. 850, because they're making their payments on time, they've got all of these accounts, that person could have a great credit score. But does that mean that this person is, a financial genius, or is it because they're just good at borrowing money? So there's a difference. So that's why the number is not as important as the content in the report. But some of the practices to ensure that we have really good credit, we've mentioned already, just limiting yourself to one major credit card. All the arguments about, oh, well, I get miles on this one, and I get points on that one, and I get cash back over here. However you justify it, when you have open lines of credit, floating around in your purse or your wallet, you're tempted to use them, and it eventually will turn into increased consumer debt. So one credit card. What you should know about your credit utilization ratio is that anything over 35% will count against your overall credit score. So let's say I go down to Home Depot and I open up a card there for $1,000. What that means is anything over $350 is going to count against me. So that goes not just for each individual account, but it goes for your total credit profile as well. So it looks at all of your lines of credit, whether with bank or credit card organization, the total available credit versus what you're utilizing. If you're over 35%, then it counts against you. Now, the banks figured that out. The banks are the one who actually introduced that rule. And they didn't do it because they're wonderful people. They did it because they know human nature. And they said, okay, so let's say, for example, I'm going to use real simple numbers here. That same Home Depot credit card. I went a $1,000 card, and I went in and I charged $500. Right? So I'm at 50% of my credit card utilization. I know anything over 35 is going to hurt me. So after I cashed out my transaction, I went over to customer service and I said, hey, can you guys increase my credit limit to $2,000? Because then I'll only be at 25%. That $500 was now only 25% of my overall credit card balance, right? So I think I just got one over on them, you know, because I lowered my credit utilization ratio, but they just got one over on me because now I have, you know, another $1,500 that I can run into Home Depot and spend that money, right? So the banks figured that out. That's why it's in there. Don't let that bite you in the rear end. No store cards. We talked about that. And your goal here is to really eventually not care about your credit. And I don't mean like kind of apathy, not care. I mean the kind of, hey, I know what's going into it. I know, you know, the metrics, the numbers, my utilization ratio, all that stuff. I know I'm managing it the right way. So, yeah, good. And when you're doing that, you're going to see your credit score improving. It will come up over time. Your credit score will determine the rate that you get for your mortgage. It will determine, you know, the rate that you pay when you take out a car loan, or, you know, what kinds of credit offers are just generally made to you. The lower your credit score, the worse your credit score is, the higher the interest that you'll pay. So there is a real cost there, and that's why managing your credit report is so very, very important. You're going to fight hard to manage your credit. I know I've seen a lot of people do it. But then what happens? Does anybody remember the show back in the 50s called Lassie? Lassie, right? It was in black and white. That's how old I am. Yeah. It was, yeah. So Timmy, this Timmy, different Timmy, Timmy and his dog Lassie, every show ran for 6 seasons. Every episode, Timmy would run outside and fall immediately into a well. I mean, it like clockwork. Every darn episode, it was ridiculous. It was before smartphones, so he couldn't call, but Lassie would show back up on the porch, and they'd see Lassie and no Timmy, and they'd be like, oh, okay, I'll get the rope, you get the ladder, and, you know, so they'd head out, and then they'd rescue Timmy. And they'd get Timmy up out of the well, and all was forgiven and forgotten, and the next day they'd go traipsing out into the field, and he'd go right back in. So when you fix your credit, don't be timid. You work hard to get out of that hole. The next day, you can't just run out there and get back in it. You know, how are we going to do that? I think the easiest way to do that is by, you know, reviewing our behaviors. You know, what caused us to charge back in that hole the first time we did it? And I know we've all done it. So, you know, what made us be Timmy on that day? So when you get out of debt, stay out of debt. And let's talk about that quickly. Some of the ways to pay off debt here. I'm going to tell you about 3 ways. 2 of them work and 1 doesn't. Now, you've probably heard of all 3 of these, so this isn't anything new. But the first method I'll describe to you is the math method. And you don't have to go to it right now, but inside your little guidebook that you have on your table is a little chart, and it'll let you, you know, list out all of your debt accounts. And the idea here is that you list those with the highest interest rate card at the very top. So in descending order on the interest rate. And the idea is, on the math method, that if you go in there and you pay off your credit cards with the highest interest first, that over time you will end up paying the least amount of interest possible. I mean, you have that debt right now, you have the obligation, you're going to pay interest. The question is how much. So if you do it that way, then you will pay the least amount of debt possible. And it's a good method, right? The problem is it doesn't have momentum built in. Motivation. And so let's talk about the momentum method. It's the same process, but instead of putting the highest bill at the top, you put your lowest balance at the top. Forget about the interest rate. Put your lowest balance at the top and then put them in descending order. Now, it's not necessarily going to save me money on interest, but darn it, I like checking boxes, you know? So when I pay off that first credit card, I'm going to check that box. I'm going to say, I did it. It's done. It's over. It's in the rear view. It makes me feel good. I've got momentum, and I want to do the next one as quickly as possible.
But what do you do with a credit card?
In the shredder.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it's not your only one, then yeah, would recommend putting that through the shredder. Closing the account if we did not have a major purchase coming up in the near future, maybe closing that account and just getting rid of it. So
I ran into something a couple months back, and I didn't use my credit card.
Mhm.
And I'll be damned if they didn't charge me a percentage of whatever I guess I'd been using it for to they put a charge on my account because I didn't use my card.
Really, I've never heard of that.
I called them up and gave them hell, and they took it away. But
Yeah.
I thought
Yeah.
it was interesting. I never had that happen before. Golden, come here.
That's a special kind of crazy right there.
Yeah.
Getting charged for not using your credit card. I haven't heard of that yet. But
They just close them.
I thought she was after somebody's lunch back there. So the momentum method, you know, that can work for a lot of people, you know, because if you're like me and you like having that positive affirmation and that feels good, great. But if you're, you know, have more discipline than I do and you want to do the math method, that will work very well also. The method that doesn't work really well is the shotgun method, right? That's where we just go, and we just pay a little bit here and a little bit over there and a little bit more here and just a tiny bit there, right? What that builds for us over time is frustration because none of them get paid off, you know? We feel like we're never making any progress, we're just spinning our wheels. And I want to make sure that I explain that properly. So whether you're doing the math method or the momentum method, whatever card is there at the top, remember, you're going to make minimum payments, just minimum payments only on everything else, but you pay everything that you can towards that top card, that top priority, whether you're doing the math method or the momentum method. In the momentum method, you'd have your lowest balance at the top, you'd be paying minimum payments on everything else, and you send everything you can towards that lowest balance. So that's the idea, you know, on how to pay that off and to really see results. The shotgun method is the one method that does not work. Guess which one of all three of those is the absolute most popular method? Shotgun. We're all doing it. Everybody's doing it. So, you know, it could be a switch to math or momentum. You know, real quickly, I talked about student loans earlier, you know, and the family dynamic that can have or introduce into the household. You know, family is a very big part of, you know, financial conversations and topics, etc. And financial stresses don't just come from student loans. It could come from, you know, failure to move out of the basement, you know, whatever the case is, right? But the point is this, is that, you know, if you're in your family, if you have financial pressures that are impacting you, you're not alone. I mean, a lot of Americans, you know, are facing that. And experts like Peter Dunn are, you know, doing their best to advise their clients that, hey, this isn't any different than when you taught him or her to, you know, ride the bicycle and you took the training wheels off. You know, what we find ourselves doing as parents. We want to solve all of our children's every problem. You know, we find ourselves keeping their financial training wheels on. You know, but it's really no different. If you find yourself in that situation, I'll just say that the sooner you get those training wheels off, the better it is for you as an individual, for your family, and certainly for the adult child. So just remember that. We're going to talk a little bit about budgeting. Some of this we've already touched on. If you turn in your guidebooks to page 6. So, in here, and this is certainly not in any order that we have discussed today, but you'll see reference to a budget in here. You know, all the big categories. I brought this little one-pager with me as well that's laying on your table. You know, use these worksheets. See where your money's going. See what your budget looks like. And it's really so that at some point in the very near future that you can hold yourselves accountable to that. You know, it's one thing to say, oh, well, yeah, I'm only going to spend $120 on food and dining out this month, you know. But if at the end of the month you look and you actually spent, you know, $640, you know, and you didn't hold yourself accountable, you know, that is going to show up somewhere, sometime. It's, you know, you're going to get to the end of the month and you're going to have more month left than paycheck, and that's not going to be a good spot, right? So anyway, holding yourself accountable. One other thing, very important thing about money, it doesn't talk, but you definitely should, especially if you're married. You know, when you come down the driveway, you know, those impromptu conversations never go very well. You know, when you're coming up the driveway and she's there like this, slapping that statement in her hand, she can't wait to get her hands on you. Those are not productive conversations. Pete recommends having regular conversations about money, about your budget, about your progress with your significant other or partner. He calls it the financial fifth. We do it on the 5th of every month. We set aside a half an hour on the 5th of every month, and we talk. And he says, you know, and I talk to a lot of people, and they say, oh my God, no. Our lives are such a mess. Our financial lives are such a mess. We could never get everything done in less than 30 minutes. And he's like, well, then that's all the more reason that you should only devote 30 minutes to it, right? Don't beat yourselves up. You know, don't be negative. Don't, you know, like honestly, 30 minutes is appropriate. But have those conversations planned and you know, have them regularly. The more you communicate about that, the better off everyone will be. And then that almost lends itself directly to accountability. I'm going to talk briefly about the ideal budget, and this is actually in your booklet also on page 5, so you don't have to write these numbers down. But one thing that's important to know about the ideal budget is that the percentages are of your net pay. And the reason you do this is because, well, your gross pay does a lot of things, right? It pays taxes, it pays health insurance, it's, you know, part of our, you know, retirement plan funding. So our gross pay does a lot of things. So when you look at these percentages, think net pay. I'm going to go through this real quick. 25% for housing, that's everything, you know, rent, mortgage payment, insurance, anything that have to do with the property. 15% on transportation, cars, you know, bus passes, whatever. 12% on groceries and dining. 10% on savings. Yes, we should be saving even outside of our 401k plans. Think of your emergency reserve fund that we talked about earlier. That same 10%, for example, once you got your emergency reserve fund up to that 3-month threshold, that same 10% can be redeployed in other areas. I get this all the time. There's no daycare on here. There's no daycare. I need daycare, right? Well, yeah, you can take, you know, percentage points from other places and create your own category. But, you know, that's an example of just how you would redeploy. Utilities and phone, 10%. If you haven't done so recently, I strongly encourage everybody, get DirecTV on the phone, AT&T, Verizon Wireless, whoever you're using, and say, look, I've been with you X number of years, what can you do? You're going to reduce your fee because they don't want you going to T-Mobile or wherever. Charity, 5%. Also very important to give a hoot about your community and back yourself up. Entertainment, 5%. Medical, 5%. Holiday gifts, 5%. I did check the calendar before walking into this meeting today. Christmas this year is on December 25th. Don't let it surprise you like it did last year. It's on December 25th this year. So remember that. Clothing 5%, and then 3% on miscellaneous. So if there's something on here that, you know, doesn't apply to you, you know how to make it your own. You know, just take 1% from here and put it over there. You know, that's how it works. But this is, you know, a pretty good start on an ideal budget. I think it gives everybody, you know, some pretty good feedback on where to start from. You know, the reason that we budget is so that at the end of the month we can look and say, is my glass empty? Is it full? Is it half full? This is the accountability part. So if you budgeted, in the beginning of the month, your income, you know, was exceeded your expenses, but at the end of the month you find that there's more month than paycheck, and you didn't have enough money, then somewhere between there is the behavior that created that situation. So the reason we budget is to review those results. So make sure you're doing that. Is your cup full? Great. Or half full? Put that towards your number one financial priority. Make sure that behavior is reflecting your number one priority. If it's not full, or worse yet, empty, that's okay, right? You know, we'll get them next week. You know, but look at that behavior, figure out where that happened, so that, you know, it's not something that we can repeat often, but, you know, if it does happen, then let's just take a quick look at it and figure out the best way to fix that. I promised I wouldn't talk retirement, but I will throw it in here. Remember, you know, all of this stuff is really just to kind of create a better financial future for yourself. You know, our parents had pensions and stuff like that, you know, from companies. We don't see that very much anymore. Only about 12% of all U.S. companies even have pensions. So it puts more pressure on our personal savings and retirement plans like the one you have here at Cain and Bultman. I always mention that, you know, if you're not contributing or you're just contributing a few percent, your first bogey to hit in this plan is to get your contributions to that 5% level, because that's the level to which your employer will match your contributions going into the plan. It is determined, as you know, on a quarterly basis, so that rate can fluctuate, whether it's 25, 50, 75, or 100% up to 5%. That number does fluctuate, but very important to get to that 5% number, because when you get in retirement, your money is your financial life. This is your security blanket, and, you know, making sure that you have money available to you to provide for those expenses in retirement, extremely, extremely important. Yes, sir.
I noticed that the budget pie was 100% of whatever the number is you're taking home, your spendable income. So is there, I mean, and savings is in there at 10%, but I mean, you know, walking around money, I mean.
Entertainment is in there. Dining out is in there. Clothing is in there. Shopping, gifts, holidays. It's there. I mean, it reflects the things that, you know, the wham, as my wife calls it, the walking around money, you know. It reflects those things. And we're still going to swipe that card, and we're still going to have transactions, and still going to entertain ourselves and do things. You know, the idea here is not to take all the fun out of our lives. We want to have a good time too. So your budget, you know, it may vary somewhat from that ideal, but those types of events are all still in there. You know, the holidays and entertainment and that kind of stuff. So we covered a lot of ground here. You guys even gave me a couple extra minutes, and for that I'm really, really thankful. But let's wrap this up here today by talking about, you know, taking this information and creating some momentum for ourselves and going forward. You know, we're almost to the end of 2019, so if you're looking for anything to focus on in 2020, maybe you found it today. But the best thing to do, you know, in evaluating your financial life is to grab everything together in one place. All your financial statements, your account information, you know, credit accounts, checking, savings, get it all into one place. You know, and I liken this experience to going on a diet, right? When we go on a diet, the first thing we want to know is, where did we start? You know, we're going to get on the scale, and we're going to say, okay, this is where I am right now. Same thing in your financial life. Pull everything together, figure out where you are. In your guide, I think there's even a little discussion about how to calculate your net worth. You know, everybody has one, by the way. You have a net worth. Is it positive or negative? It's going to be different for everybody, but you have a net worth. And that's one number that you could use to track your progress over time. You know, if you're young and early in your career and you've got, you know, a mortgage payment and a this and that, you know, it's very conceivable your net worth could be negative $235,000, right? But wear that like a badge with honor and say, yeah, negative 235, and then next year you're, negative 218, right? Woo! That's a big swing right there, right? But that's a number that you can use to monitor your progress, and negative doesn't indicate bad if you're working towards your goals. Step on the scale, take that snapshot. Remember to recruit an accountability partner, spouse, friend, SO, somebody else. Set goals for yourself, short, measurable goals. We talked about reducing our swipes by 25%. Try to get it down to a reasonable number. This should be a positive experience, so don't focus on negativity. Sometimes that can happen when we think about financial things. We can be like, oh shoot. Think positively. Think about what you're trying to create. Start counting your transactions, so you know kind of where you are. Examine your plans, as I mentioned, Verizon, Comcast, DirecTV, whomever it is. Here's something we haven't talked about, money reconnaissance. Has anybody ever been on the state of Florida Secretary of State website? Did you know you can go out there and you can search on your name? Maybe you find, I left a paycheck at a former employer, or you find money from family members, and so I'm not saying you all have something out there, but I've talked to enough people to know that there's real money out there. So finally, dig into your benefits book. I'm not as familiar with your benefits package here, but oftentimes there are little things in your benefits package that can make a difference, whether it's an employee assistance program associated with your health insurance, or any other ancillary benefit. See if there's something in there that you can take advantage of. And finally, reward your progress. Have your walking around money in your pocket and make good use of it. So when you see something that a good experience for you and or your family that you want to take advantage of, do that and reward yourself. So 62 minutes to change. I apologize, but thank you all very much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you again. I think we're going to come back in February as well. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So you always see these commercials on TV about people can help you with your credit card debt. Call this number. Are these legitimate? What's your experience with that?
So there are. That's a great question too, by the way. There are a lot of companies out there that want to help you with credit card debt. Right? Some of the first ones, I would say, maybe not the most reputable firms. And what I mean by that is that they just want to. If you've got 4 accounts, $5,000 at each one, they want to roll them all up, put them all in a nice little package, $20,000 in debt, get you a new interest rate, and get you set up. They're selling debt consolidation, and that's what they do. But I think a lot of those firms,
lower interest rate.
Yeah, well, yes, but they're in it for their fees, etc. Ideally, you'll get a lower interest rate. And I think that now, who's that big one that I'm hearing about? They're on TV.
Well, I was going to ask if you had one that.
Yeah, and I probably shouldn't endorse them anyway if I did, but there's a company that's very aggressively advertising right now, and you can get an account consolidation loan for about 5.5%. It's based on your credit score or something like that.
That's
but
SoFi or Light
SoFi, yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for that. Yeah, so SoFi, but they're one of 1,000 that are out there. You can go online and see who would be the best provider for you. You can get offers. I know in that Mint software package that I mentioned earlier, they do that. Credit Karma is another app that you can have on your phone. They'll do that. They'll make recommendations on that. And there's certainly a benefit. If you're paying 12, 14, 17% on credit cards over here, if you can consolidate them and get it down to 5, 6, 7, even 9% in that case, right? Do it. Save that interest.
So it's
save
a
that
legitimate
money.
resource.
Yes, absolutely, Alan. Yeah.
Okay.
Just make sure that you're reading the fine print, because you could run into any number of
And you got to be careful
type
with
of
some
people
of
out
that
there.
because they will be a detriment to your credit report. It's more like those companies will
Yeah.
typically try to settle with their creditors for less of an amount and not necessarily leave your credit
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that was the other thing that they would do, is they would, they package you all up into a $20,000 loan, but what they didn't tell you is they got $8,000 forgiven over here, but you're still paying 20. So that's just going to be all juice, for them. So
that's something you can negotiate too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So just make sure that you understand what they're offering, at each step.
We sure appreciate it, but does anybody have any 401k questions about theirs? General questions? I want to talk to Tim afterwards. Anybody? 401k, it's important stuff.
Well, if not today, know that, we're here for you Monday through Friday, so.
She's not eligible yet, but she's going to get in, right?
Yeah.
Coming right up. Okay. All right. Well.
By the way, it'd be an interesting thing to say that when we started this, obviously, we had 0, and we just passed 8 million.
Yeah, just
So,
went over 8 million.
in our 401k.
Yeah.
So, it's a good program. I'm not trying to tell you to get in it,
But the
but I
key-
would say that you ought to.
The key is starting young.
Yeah.
You got to start young.
I will say this too, we reviewed it in our meeting earlier today, that Cain and Bultman has, and just in the last 12 months, has put in close to $60,000 into this plan. That's $60,000 that does absolutely nothing for anybody, here at Cain and Bultman except for you guys. So that's money that they're putting in your pocket, $60,000. That's just in the last 12 months. I know some years it's even higher. But they put their money where their mouth is. And by the way, thanks to everybody that set this meeting up here today at Cain and Bultman, because that's a lot of clients, but few of it, it's difficult for folks to get everybody in a room for an hour. I know that's a commitment that these guys make to you all to provide this kind of ongoing communication. So, and they bring in barbecue? Come on.
Well, we sure appreciate it.
Hey, thank you, Alan.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Very good.